Welcome everybody, you're watching Mr. Fugu Data Science. Today I wanted to create a beginner's tutorial for someone who's never used MongoDB. Now, we're going to interface from R to Mongo using Mongolite. I will also show a few shell commands. So, before we get started, let's look at the command line. So, for the command line, after you enter the Mongo shell, there's a few generic commands that you can do. You could look for all of databases by saying show DBs. You can use a particular database, or the interesting thing with MongoDB, you could create it on the fly using the same command, which is use and then the database name. I'm creating a database called Video Practice today. It'll say you're switching to this database. Afterwards, you could say DB and it'll print out the current database that you're using. From there, I want to create a collection. A collection is basically like your table that you would think of in a Postgres or SQL format. I'm calling my collection vid practice, so video practice. So it inserted correctly. Then I would like to say show me all of my collections that are available. So you do show collections. Then we can look at the databases once again and you'll see that it's available. When we did it before up here, you'll notice that while we created a new database, it doesn't show up here until we populate it with something. The same thing happens when you're dealing with collections too. Alright, so after I created these, I wanted to do a few imports. For those who have never used Mongolite, you're going to need to install it with install.packages and then call it in like this. We need to import the libraries of tidyverse, knitter, markdown, and Mongolite. Okay, now let's do a few things. Let's create our connection. Okay, so I'm going to just call mine Mongo connection, but I'm just abbreviating it. And then we need to call Mongo. And then from there, we need to call in our collection, which will be our vid prac, and then my database that I'm using, which would be the video practice. And then we're good to go. Oh, so let's import these in real quick. There we go. And then this little info thing, I'm not going to uncomment this because it'll show personal information, but you could do this at your own accord. Let's do a basic insert so you have some data to play around with. So let me just call this, I don't know, fun data, and then let's create a vector where we're calling in what we want to create. So I'm going to create a name, which would be the first and the last names, and I'm going to call this person Mr. Bilbo. I'm going to call in the last name of Mr. Bilbo, and his last name will be Baggins. Mr. Baggins also has a few things associated. He has hobbies, and these hobbies will be interesting because they are a list. This to this. And inside of this list, what are his hobbies? He likes to find rings. He likes to go on adventures. He likes to also, I'll just say he does magic. Let's have some fun with it. Then we need to, let's create one more person so we can have a little fun with this. And let's create somebody named Golem. And Mr. Golem, he currently doesn't have a last name. So Mr. Golem doesn't have his last name, but he does have some hobbies. And what are his hobbies? He likes to steal rings. He likes to bite people. And what else would he like to do? Talk to himself. Sure, sounds nice. Okay, so if you notice here, these are not of the same size, like something you would use for a schema in Postgres. You have a lot of flexibility using MongoDB. So we need to send this data over. So how are we going to do that? We need to first realize that there's an error here. So I missed something. So let's figure out where I missed this. Something is awry. Something is not right. There we are. There we are. You always have to pay attention to the little nuances. So let's do our insert statement. And let's insert our fun little data. And if you look, we did 2 inserts. We didn't do anything else. Perfect. So let's check this out, this current data out. So let's do a find statement. Here, you're leaving this open, so it's taking all of your parameters, every single field. A field you could think of as a column. And now we print off our data. And we see that we have everything looking good, but we don't have a last name for Mr. Golem. We don't need to have a last name. But let's give him a last name and make him feel right at home with everybody else. Alrighty, so this do our little trusty update statement. And what are we going to use for our update statement? Well, we could do this a few ways. Let's do it first a semi-correct way. And I say semi-correct because I'm calling in the first name of Golem. Here there's only 2 rows, but what happens if somebody had the same first name as him and we were doing an update by first name? We'd have an issue. Really, we should use the IDs that are created, and I'll show you that a little later, but let's just continue this for now. Alright, so this call in Mr. Golem and this update by the first name, and we have to set some values that we're going to change. So you use a set operator with this $sign. Then we need to create some new brackets and call a last name that we're going to create. We're going to call him the Lonely for his last name, just to be a little fun with this. And let's send that off, and Mr. Lonely went through. What's interesting is this should have been used and didn't need to be at this time, which was interesting. So when I did this before, it didn't work without having upsert equals true. And upsert is basically allowing you to update something that already exists. So that's interesting that this filled in, because last time I did this I had to use this. Nevertheless, we got a good old last name from Mr. Golem, our creepy little buddy. So let's do some adding into our arrays. Okay, so the arrays I'm talking about are these right here for the hobbies. So let's add into our arrays. Let's do this effectively, because we're not going to add into every array. We're only going to add into Mr. Golem because he has an extra hobby we need to take care of. So Mr. Golem, let's give you some fun. So let's find, we're going to say we're going to find everything, but we're also going to do something here, which we haven't seen just yet. So let's find some fields where we're going to call in the ID, and we're going to call 1. And that means that we are calling it as true for it to print out for our field. So Mr. Golem, he has this right here. So let's copy that because that's his unique ID. These are basically like hashed IDs, but there's a significance about this, and I've done it in one of my previous videos on how this is actually set up with your machine and kind of pseudo random stuff. Anyway, so let's create this update for Mr. Golem. So how are we going to do this? Well, let's do an aggregate and see how that's going to work. Okay, so this aggregate that we're going to do is going to be a little involved, but we're going to try to match on the ID of our trusty old friend Mr. Golem, where we're going to cut and paste his ID. But we need to call in another little operator, and we need to do some more brackets for this. Then we'll paste that in. Now, what do we have to do? Because this is starting to look ridiculous, right? Let's hit a comma and then start calling in what we're going to start messing with. So we need to do something called add a field. And add a field allows you to basically add a new column or add something to an array. Just depends on what your situation is. So let's do the add fields, and then we need to do another bracket. And what are we adding into? We're adding into the hobbies, where we are needing to use our special little operator again, the $sign. But we're not quite there yet, because we also need to establish what we're going to change, and we need to concatenate the array. So we're basically adding on to the end of our array, which would be our hobbies. And what do we want to add into the hobbies? We want to add in what his actual hobby is, and his hobby is eating fish. That's what his hobby is. So then we can see if this is going to work. Hopefully I didn't mangle this up. We could just print off everything, and sometimes you make a mistake and then you fix your mistake, and there we are. So it says, okay, we print off the ID with our good old friend Mr. Golem, who also likes to eat fish. But if you noticed here, there's something interesting, because you don't see that eating fish when you print off the query that has everything, but your trusty old aggregate does. Well, I didn't actually update, I just ran a query. Okay, so let's get into this and actually update our trusty old friend so he can have his hobby established of eating some fish. So let's do our update, but now we're going to call in our trusty old ID so we know who we're calling in. Once again, we need to not forget our little operator, and we're calling the OID, which is your object ID, just a shorthand for it. And then let's paste in our ID. Now we're going to use what's called a push operator. Alright, now what are we doing with this push operator? We're going to use this so we can insert into our hobbies. So we're going to say he eats fish once again. And then let's see if it'll do it without the upsert equals true. So we get a little error because I didn't pay attention to something. There we are. Let's see if it updated. He eats fish. That's so interesting. So I don't have to say upsert equals true, huh? Okay. So now we actually know that it updated and says that he likes to eat fish. Let's try some sorting. This is quite a bit easier. You're going to see something lit goes awry really fast. So when you're doing some sorting, you're going to find something interesting. So let's first sort by the first name and see what prints off. So we worked off first name Golem, first name Mr. Bilbo. They're in order, but if you notice, the fields or columns are not in the same order. So how can we rectify this? Let's try something. Let's do last name. Let's see if this works. So if you notice, this is kind of goofy and it doesn't retain the order of the columns or features. So that's something that's interesting. I think there's a way that you can use an operator to take care of this. One of the old operators is deprecated that I know of. Something also I need to mention before I forget. If you're dealing with really large data sets and you're trying to do a sorting, you're limited here. So make sure that you understand that, because you end up getting error and it won't do it. And in the event that that occurs, you could try to rectify it by creating an index on something that was unique, and then you're sorting actually very easily in constant time because you already have the index. So that's just something to take note of. We can select and find something by its unique ID, which we've already done a few times, but let's just print that out. So let's do that. So let's call our trusty old OID, cover it up with some braces, cut and paste our good old buddy. Oh, and there we go. So you can also download files, which is really convenient. So if you want to dump your database, we could create a directory that'll output some folder within a current working directory to whatever name we would like. So I'm calling my directory output files practice, and you can see I already created one prior. Then I could dump a file. So let's call my file that I'm going to dump and use an export statement. Then I'm going to call the file and then the file that I want to send, and I'm sending this file to this folder, and then I'm just going to call it hobbies.json and send that off, and you can see, and it'll send it off, and we can see it's right there. There's our little file that we created. Now we could also do some deletes. So what do we want to delete? Well, let's delete one of the rows that we were dealing with. Let's do the Mr. Golem and let's delete him and see what that looks like. So if we just want to delete a row, we would, let's just cut all of this. So let's print this all off before we do some deletes. Then let's do some deleting of Mr. Golem. Now let's print this off, and you can see Mr. Golem is gone. Now if you want to drop the collection, but you don't want to, if you want to drop the data within the collection, but you don't want to drop the collection itself, you do a statement like this, where we would do the remove once again, but you make this simple like this. So this is going to delete everything within our collection. It's going to be empty now. So let's look. See, it's empty. You can use the drop, and it actually drops the whole collection itself. And now you don't have anything in there as well. And some basic shell commands, we went over some of these in the beginning. But for instance, if you were dealing with a weird name for your collection that was separated by spaces or hyphens or something, you can do a .get collection, which is really handy. If you're working out of a shell script, you can't exactly do some of the functionality of use whatever database, use whatever collection, but you can do a get sibling, and then you would just be working from your current DB. You would put in here and get the sibling, and that would work, and then that would give you flexibility of getting neighboring databases, so you could work with other collections. And then if you just needed to exit in the command line or terminal, you just do a quit if you're in there, and then you can always run a help if you need to. So those are some of the basic commands that are really useful. I didn't do any indexing for this tutorial. One, basically because there's only 2 rows. 2, there was nothing important to index on. And 3, it was giving me issues with the arrays. So I would like to say thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. And if you subscribe, turn on that notification bell. I hope this brought utility to somebody. As always, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.